Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today with a news update for The Outer Worlds. Today we're tackling the topic of whether or not this title is an open world game. I've briefly covered it in previous news updates for The Outer Worlds, but never made a whole video dedicated to the topic because we never really had an official answer from Obsidian on whether or not this was an open world game. Now we have it, so let's get right into it. Starting off with a tweet from Mikey Dowling who says, just to be clear, The Outer Worlds is not a complete open world game. To get a sense of how open the game will be, you can compare it to the similarities in how KOTOR 2 handles world exploration. You'll have vast areas to explore and will be able to travel to other locations. Furthermore, Kotaku, who I will have linked in the description down below, has a slightly different worded response that they received via email. There are 2 planets in the game, Obsidian says, although they're not open worlds, they're compartmentalized. Each of them contains several areas to explore, and Obsidian says there will be plenty to do, but the scale will be very different than New Vegas. While we aren't discussing the exact amount of areas, a good bit of context for the approach is to think of what we did in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, with potentially more ground to cover and explore in each area, Dowling said in an email. Naturally, you all know I love the Knights of the Old Republic series. Knights of the Old Republic 2 did come from Obsidian Entertainment, so seeing them draw comparisons directly to that title with how they're handling the world space is extremely exciting for me, and I'm going to tell you why it should excite you, even if maybe KOTOR isn't up your alley or you haven't played those games before. So let's start off from the beginning. In Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, you get your Ebon Hawk eventually, which is your way from getting planet to planet, much like the ship hub that is in the Outer Worlds. There is a little computer terminal inside the Ebon Hawk, which allows you to select throughout various planets, and each planet has its own self-contained story but plays a role in the overall main narrative arc. Each of those self-contained stories were super absorbing, engaging, interesting, built unique characters, had different side quests, had lots of personalities, and allowed for every world to have its own feel and flavor. Now they're saying that in the Outer Worlds, there are 2 planets that we're going to be able to explore, which makes sense so far with the lore that's been built around this game, because I just talked about in a previous update through IGN the difference between Halcyon, which is the place that is civilized, there is human life, and then there's also Monarch, which looks like a radiated planet, for God's sake, something straight out of Fallout, and it's the home to a lot of mutants, and it's going to be a dangerous area. So my imagination is we're bouncing between those 2, and then certain story segments are going to take us off the beaten path. Maybe for companion missions, it'll be a little bit like a Mass Effect 2, where we go to a unique planet just for that mission. I digress though, back to KOTOR 2. The reason I love how they're going to build the areas like this is because it feels like each area has a focus and it's easier to dissect and digest for gamers. Perhaps I am of a different mindset, but I'm a big believer that we don't always need these huge multi-100-hour experiences. I know people look for that, especially in the games they are most excited for, but for me, I will take a game that is 30 hours long and that there was so much thought put into those 30 hours that I could replay those 30 hours 3 times over and get 90 out of it because there was so much replayability and new things to see throughout each playthrough, rather than 100 flat hours that just felt like stretched out padded content with a lot of quantity over quality decisions being made, something that would remind me a lot of Dragon Age Inquisition. There's little flickers of brilliance here and there, but overall the product was really underwhelming for myself. I know I sit in the minority a bit on that one, so I won't go on too much of a tangent there, but I just believe that we don't need to chase down these gargantuan experiences when we can have something a little more condensed, focused, and because of that we can actually get something much bigger and better because there would be so much replayability ingrained into that experience. The only thing I get afraid of is that worked back then in 2004 for Obsidian. I hope that these areas are more open and larger where we're not going to have 1,000,001 loading screens. KOTOR 2, it's a little more manageable because it's compatible on Xbox One, it's available on PC, so those loading screens very fast, like half a second long. But nowadays, I don't imagine they go through that quickly. Just I feel you should all know everything about how these world spaces play out. Let's say you haven't played KOTOR, but you're looking for some other examples of not open world games, but more so focused areas with a lot to do within them. I'd say great suggestions are Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, which some folks from Obsidian actually did work on, and also Deus Ex. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is such a superb role-playing game, and Deus Ex, with the way it handles its world space, is how exactly I feel the Outer Worlds will go down. It tailors to your build, everything's accessible to you in one way or another, and then there's choice and consequence throughout each area. Some choices pertain just to that area, and some choices pertain to the overall main story that affect everybody. On the topic of Fallout New Vegas and its open world, I did enjoy it quite a bit while exploring it, but there was one gripe that still to this day I do have. Now, I believe that hardcore mode is the best way to play Fallout New Vegas, however, that doesn't apply for everybody, and I often felt that there were locations strictly reserved for this hardcore mode. You'd stumble upon a shack and all it would have was a bed, some food, just a small amount of resources, that was really it, and then you would carry on. There were a lot of locations that didn't assimilate with the qualities that we tie to New Vegas, like characters, quirky encounters, stuff along those lines, and I think that's because the world space was so big, you simply cannot fill it all with that high level of quality. But when you tie it to a much smaller space where there is more developer control, there is a lot more they can do within this area and fill it with more quality, you start to shake off stuff that I personally had an issue with, like those locations that just felt reserved for a mode and didn't offer much to most of its players. It's just some food for thought on how this could be a good change of pace for Obsidian. Personally, I have become fatigued with open world games, not because they're bad, but more so because there are so many, and everyone thinks everything has to go open world for it to be the next big thing. Another example, although it's not an RPG, could be Monster Hunter World. You have just large areas that each have their own personality, creatures, things to discover, and they all feel unique. I know some folks would love for it to be open world. I totally understand why. Part of it is also probably budgeting. Obsidian's really just playing to their strengths here from what I'm looking at. All their games have sort of been built around this structure, and it's always worked. So why step away from that with a brand new IP? Personally, I feel they're giving people exactly what they want at the right time. I feel like if this were at any other time where folks aren't looking for a really niche RPG, then maybe more complaints would arise about the fact that this game isn't open world. But for me, I am a fan of them creating areas similar to KOTOR, especially because they're going to be more detailed. There's going to be a lot more in them. It's all good stuff. It's all good stuff. It allows for more focus. It allows for more reaction, which is what you look for in an RPG. Sometimes in these open world games, there's just so much dynamic stuff to account for that a lot of the choice gets watered down for the player. And in an Obsidian game, I don't think that would be acceptable, nor would I think that aligns with their design philosophies. So for me, I think the idea to stick with these more self-contained areas is a very smart decision by the development team. Anyway, that's all I've got for you on this news update / discussion video. I would love to hear your thoughts on the Outer Worlds. Would you rather it be open world, or are you okay with areas being similar to Knights of the Old Republic 2? Let me know in the comments down below. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that, as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.